Hello, today I'm going to be talking about this painting of a little hut and river. I'm using Procreate on an iPad, and I start off by blocking in the big shapes on separate layers and trying to get a rough idea what the entire painting is going to look like before worrying about any details. One thing to note is I use very dark colors to start with because I will be highlighting over the top of this, so make sure your painting is overly dark to start with, and then I go on to highlight. As you can see, I've already started this over the dark layers, depending on where the sun is coming from. In this painting, it is coming from the right hand side, so I need to add the highlights where the sun hits these dark areas. It doesn't have to be incredibly accurate, but it needs to be consistent. So make sure wherever you put these highlights that it's consistent with the highlights on the other big shapes. So you can build this up slowly or quickly depending on the style that you use. My style is pretty simple, so I generally only have one or two different layers of highlights depending on how much focus I want on this area. So at the moment I'm doing like the ridge where the hut is going to go on, and this is the important area, so I have a bit more detail going on, which means I'll have more variations of the highlights. So now I'm over to the left hand side with all the bushes, and I need a lot of detail because otherwise it won't look like bushes, but I don't want it too contrasty to take your eyes away from the hut and the right hand side. So again, I build up the detail by making fairly big shapes still, but within the areas, and making sure to leave lots of gaps. It's very important to leave lots of gaps where the shadows would be. So obviously on this case it'll be on the left hand side, and sometimes I overdo it and then I have to go back and add some shadows back, but that's kind of the process everywhere now. So same with the rocks. It's really down to the shapes of things, how you add the detail. The shapes matter more than most things like color and lightness, etc. So you'll notice on the trees there's lots of round shapes, lots of little dots, things like that. But when you look at the rocks, there will be big square shapes or rectangles and sharper. So depending on which aspect you're working on is how you're going to add the detail. Now, if you notice the highlights on the grass, they are horizontal to the floor, so that's very important. So it has some perspective to it. So I'm onto the foreground now, and these are some big leaves on the floor. And they don't have to be entirely accurate, but again, the most important thing is the shape. If you get the shape correct, everything else is kind of an added bonus, because you can see there's some sort of maybe seaweed or leaves or something, but if you get the shape correct, that's most of the battle. Even if I add more detail and color and highlights, etc., you can kind of still tell what they are. So make sure you get that step right first, and then worry about adding the extras later. You can't really do it the other way around. If you have a bad shape, it's going to be very difficult, no matter what you do, to make it look correct if the shape doesn't work. So you can see me messing around with the shape a little bit by erasing little holes, because that's generally what happens with leaves. You get little holes and things. But the concept's the same here. I'm breaking up the shapes with smaller shapes, and I don't add too much detail with this style. It's not meant to be realistic. It's more of a comic-y type style, so I want to add a little bit of detail, so you can tell the texture of it. But I don't want to go overboard. So I'm bouncing around now, trying to add highlights where they should be, and some mist effects and things like that. That's going to give me a basically is just some effects to make it look a bit more interesting and, you know, represent, maybe there's some highlights and things like that. So we're on to the hut up the top. This is obviously going to be the main focus of the painting, so I spend a little bit of time on this. But it's the process is roughly the same. I get the big shapes in and then break the big shapes up with detail. Now, one trick for the detail is just make sure the colors of the detail don't stand out too much. And if you take your time, you can build up the layers slowly. And the slower you do that, and the more layers you have, the more realistic it will get. So if you want a more realistic look, just keep on adding more and more subtle layers every time. And I add a bit of texture with just little brushes. Any brushes will do, and variations of color. Now I don't want to go overboard because this house is fairly small. So given how small it is, you don't want to add too much detail because it'll look too busy. So I'm putting in some more detail here. Basically I'm putting little dots everywhere just to imply there's lots of bushes and things. This is kind of optional, you don't need to do it, it'll just make the foliage look a bit more realistic. But that's about it really. If you found this useful, give me a sub and like, and I'll see you in the next one.